Have you ever felt like you're adrift in the overwhelming rapids of caregiving? This is a special episode today where we dive deep into the waters of this very challenge. With us today is Theresa Wilbanks, a beacon of hope and wisdom for those lost in the daunting task of caring for a loved one. Teresa is an accomplished author, a passionate speaker, and the host of the Caregiving Strategies podcast. She founded Sustainable Caregiving after experiencing firsthand the turbulent emotions of looking after her father until his final days at 99. During that period, she found herself wading into caregiving, initially from a distance, and struck by the weight of emotions from tranquil moments of calm to the overwhelming challenges. Teresa likens the caregiving journey to being on a raft navigating through a river's unpredictable turn. But what makes Teresa's journey inspiring is her ability to turn adversity into a roadmap for others. Her book, Navigating the Caregiver River, A Journey to Sustainable Caregiving, not only captures her story, but also outlines her innovative sustainable caregiving strategies. These strategies encompass both the emotional storm one undergoes, as well as offer practical advice from Teresa's own experiences and reflections. Today, we talk about the depths of the emotional impact of caregiving, understand the essence of sustainable caregiving. We talk about the significance of self-care. We dive into insights from her book and much more. So whether you're a caregiver feeling the weight of responsibility, someone who's witnessed the caregiver journey, or curious about the landscape of caregiving, today's conversation gives you insights and inspiration. Here is my interview with Theresa Wilbanks. Hi, Teresa. Thanks for being here finally after all this time since we've met. It's so good to see you.
Oh, hi, Nicole. It's so great to see you too.
So wonderful. We had the opportunity to meet at the Care Colloquium, and I remember coming over and I bought your book, and I really wanted to have the chance to learn more. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I loved your book. It was easy to read, and I loved how you really pulled in the analogy of the Caregiver River throughout throughout the novel, and it made it very relatable. And it's so true. There are so many emotions that we go through, and you have a personal story that really brought you into writing the book, but also supporting others. And I would love for you to share with us how you got here and just decided to become an advocate for sustainable caregiving.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. And thank you for letting me share the story and share the opportunity to support family caregivers. So yeah, like a lot of folks, I was, you know, knew that he was in his early 90s. So I knew that he would need care at some point, but didn't realize that we were there. And my husband and I were living in France. And I talked to dad every 3 days. He, in fact, came to visit us, not, too long before that. And he was doing great. And then all of a sudden there was a fire, and I got very concerned because he downplayed it and said it wasn't a big deal. But little by little, things came out. And it was definitely a bigger issue than he was sharing. And my brother didn't live so far away, but he wasn't able to get over and check things out. And my husband and I said, we probably need to be closer than an ocean away. So we moved back, and, it felt so good to start helping him and, just helping with errands and tasks. He was still working out at the fitness center, 3 times a week. He was driving, but then he had a stroke. So he was diagnosed with AFib. We went through all of that. He recovered completely, but he was no longer driving. So you can imagine at that point, the care becomes, a lot more involved. But I still don't connect with the term caregiver. So I'm just helping out. I'm being a good daughter. And the funny thing is, Nicole, and I know you went through this too, is, I saw care firsthand. My grandmother moved in with us, my mom's mom, when I lived there, and I gave up my room for her. And then I saw my folks care for my dad's mom until she passed at 104, but I had no idea what they were going through. And so it caught me off guard. And when I realized that I was not in a sustainable experience, it was too late. I was burned out. Dad's, in his mid 90s at this point. I'm in my early 50s, and I don't think I'm going to survive it. I don't think I'm going to outlive him. And that was real. Those were real thoughts,
Wow.
that I could not share with anyone, could not express that because, people think that you're exaggerating if they've never been through it. So that's when I realized. And at this point, I was burned out, but I was connecting caregivers with resources because I had already looked back and realized it didn't have to be as challenging as it was if I had known about all these resources that were out there and available. Yet I was struggling with the emotions. I still had so much, anger and resentment. And I thought, if I can't get this under control, I can't really help caregivers. And that's when I decided to deconstruct the caregiving experience, figure out what was going on. Why was this so hard? And then I put these strategies together to help other caregivers. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So Dad passed in December 2020. But I will say, after I figured out how to sustain my own well-being better, our relationship improved. It got back to, close to where it was because I was watching it deteriorate in front of my eyes. I was very worried about the regret I would have because of these feelings that I could not get under control. And so that's how I came to help other family caregivers.
It's so true when you talk about you waded into caregiving long distance at first. It's like you kind of
Yes.
got your feet wet and then it was like full immersion before you realized it, I'm sure.
Yes. Yes. Full immersion and drowning.
Yeah.
That feeling of, not being able to get my head above water. I'm not going to survive this.
Mhm.
And then the river analogy really did resonate with me because the rapids, you go through these
Mm.
sections that you're just feeling so out of control. The boulders, the obstacles just appear out of nowhere.
Mhm.
And all of this was happening. And I will say that when I kind of felt like I began navigating the experiences, when I started using these strategies, and it wasn't one, they all had to work together. In fact,
Mm.
sometimes when we can try to do the things to help us feel better, it feels like more work, and it feels
Right.
worse because we're failing at them.
Yeah.
But once they started to work together, I felt like I was navigating the river, and I was able to anticipate, if not anticipate the obstacle, at least manage it better.
Yeah.
So
And it's so true when we think about, okay, rafting through a river, there are, we can anticipate it, right? If we have the roadmap of, we know rapids are here, then we might have a period of calm and then we've got to prepare to get through this next section and
yeah.
get to that other side. There is a part of your book where you have strategies and sync and reflection and journal questions. So for our listeners, know that they need to read the book because they've got to go through the whole walking through us identifying some of those questions for ourselves and being able to put things in practice. And I think it's helpful because when we're in it, we don't always know what we need to be thinking about or how to even identify what some of those emotions are. I wanted to read a quote that you had in the book because I thought it was so good from Cheryl Strayed. You can't cry it away or eat it away or starve it away or walk it away or punch it away or even therapy it away. It's just there and you have to survive it. You have to endure it. You have to live through it and love it and move on and be better for it. And isn't that what it is about? I'm so glad you included that.
Yeah, thank you. And that, to me, and even hearing that now, gives me chills, and it resonates because even with strategies, it didn't make the experience easier. It
Mm-hmm.
was still hard. And it was something that I was able to maybe navigate better, but that those feelings were still there, that constant worry, the fear. I, maybe felt like I could manage the next thing that came, but I was still always worried about Dad. And
Mm-hmm.
it's been a few years now, but wake up, I'll have had a dream that I was back in it, and those feelings come back, and I'm right back
Mm.
in the middle of it. So, what Cheryl Strayed is saying, it's just so important for us to know that it's okay to feel that way. That's just how it is. But the thing is, we learn new skills, we grow, and we are better for it. And I know that, without question, I am able to navigate life better now because of all that I went through. I use these strategies today. After Dad passed, I kind of set them aside and I'm like, I don't need those anymore. The stress
Yeah.
is lifted. And I mean, certainly I was grieving, I was still sad, but I felt like I didn't have that constant worry to deal with. Well, that's not true because life is hard. And so
Mhm.
these strategies, I started to put them back into practice, and then I started to feel better again. So Cheryl Strayed, her quote is so meaningful. We can all take something away from that.
I think so. And you're right, life is hard. We're always having to face some sort of challenge or thing that we're going through, and to be able to take what we've learned in our caregiving and bring it into other aspects of our life. It's like creating that resiliency for all of life's challenges that come our way. And I really love how you had two parts to the book. It was the emotional storms, which is such a big part of it, and practical advice, which is exactly what we need. So many families have those questions about just the practicalities of figuring different situations out. You talk about the raging river of emotions when you're caring for that family member. What are some of these emotions and how have they influenced your approach to caregiving? I know so many families are like, how can I keep doing this? This is so much.
Yes. So for me, the trifecta was guilt, anger, and resentment.
Mm,
And it was like a swirling cyclone fueled by fear. And the fueled by fear part, I don't think I realized until later. I just knew I was feeling these emotions that they did fuel each other. They led into each other. And as I explored later, the guilt was really shame. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I was feeling bad about the thoughts I was having.
mm,
So all of this was creating this environment that was really difficult to manage dad's day-to-day, care and his needs. Because when, for example, he would do something that I felt like wasn't in his own best interest, and I would feel this anger, and I felt like I am worried more about his health and welfare than he is, that type of thing. And so then I would react, and you imagine these constant this it's sort of conflict created by dad's desire for dignity and independence, and my concern for his health and well-being and safety.
mhm,
Safety is a big one.
mhm,
So, and the resentment, I will say, came from clearly in my 50s. Didn't expect to spend my 50s this way. My husband and I thought we'd be traveling, and now we're sort of locked into a place in a state that our future is no longer up to us. So until I worked through all of that, those a lot of anger came from the resentment,
mhm.
and even anger that I felt this shame, like how and that's those are the emotions that I had to work through. And that's where the strategies came from, because managing the emotions, you have to learn venting, sharing with friends. That doesn't
Mhm.
work if they've not been in a caregiving situation. So all the things that I was trying to do, venting to my husband constantly, not a great strategy either,
Yeah.
a little bit, but
Mhm.
figuring out how to be able to share in a way that feels helpful and good. It was a process,
Yeah.
figuring out that journaling is a way to get these emotions out and process them.
Mhm.
And yeah, so just managing the emotions was definitely a big part
Big
of the
part.
strategies.
And so many emotions that so many of us feel, but then we also, I think, feel bad talking about our anger or resentment, So it's kind of this like, gosh, I'm really feeling this way, but is it okay to talk about that or to share that? And it is. We absolutely know that it is. It's so important. Real quick, you had talked about balancing safety but independence, and in your book, you talk about your dad's desire to want to go skydiving. And that's like such an example of he really wanted to do that. Tell us, okay, so how did that all happen? What came out of that?
So I think it was his 94th birthday. He decided that he wanted to go skydiving for his birthday, and he kept bringing it up. And for me, it just triggered so much anxiety every time he
Mhm.
would bring it up. And I could tell also that he enjoyed my reaction. So this was a little dance between us that I was not
Mhm.
enjoying at all. He and I were at his primary care physician's office, and he brought it up with Dr. G, and Dr. G said, "Why not?" And I was stunned, completely stunned. And all of a sudden I said, "Well, why not?" And it was a bit rhetorical. It was a bit of a release. It was a bit of, okay, well, maybe we should try to do this. And so there was a veterans office. This veteran was taking folks up and they were jumping just to help with PTSD. And he said, sure, I don't see why this couldn't happen. So we found the place, got him signed up. My brother and his daughter, my niece, are going to jump with him. I had no interest in doing that.
I don't think I
And
would either. Yeah.
but I would take him. And the funny thing is, Nicole, we had one of his friends went along with us, and it was an hour drive to the place. And Bud is just whispering in my ear, this is a bad idea. Like, we shouldn't be doing this. But he's there in front of Dad encouraging. And I'm like, Bud, I'm on team Dad now. We're doing this and we need your support. Family and friends, they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, nope, we're doing this. And we got there, and actually Dad tried to back out the entire way there. He actually didn't want to do it, but I'm like, no, we're doing it. This is my little bit of control that I can have. I knew if he didn't want to do it at the end of the day, we wouldn't. But he got there, and we're watching folks go up. The person who's gonna to jump with him says, oh, I can land him on his feet. So now my biggest fear is coming true. He's going to break a leg. Maybe not my biggest fear, but that was one of them. And a group of instructors came down and said the winds were up too much. So it wasn't safe for anyone else to go up and jump. And Dad had the option to get a refund, to wait it out, or to just get a gift certificate for another jump. And he decided that he did not need to do this.
Okay.
So in his mind, it's perfect.
Yeah.
You know, he was going to jump, the winds came up, and he couldn't do it. But oh my gosh, what a lesson I learned. You know, Dad lived a full life. He deserved to be able to make his own decisions. I'm so fearful for his well-being that I'm not allowing him to have an experience that he really wanted to have. And it definitely shifted. You know, this is, I talk about when winning is losing. This is a big example of when, you know, I almost won and Dad didn't get the opportunity to jump. Wouldn't have had the chance, but is that really winning? It's not.
Right.
So, and we can apply that to little conflicts too. And I did. From there forward, I was able to look at the small conflicts. Now, granted, there was another time I walked in, he's on a 6-foot ladder, Velcroing a painting, one of his paintings to the ceiling. Now, that's not okay. So we manage that. So there are things certainly that we're going to do to protect the ones we're caring for, but there's a lot we can give up and let them have their independence or dignity and their desires.
Yeah, and I'm sure too he probably felt just that you allowed him to make that decision, and he was going to be able to do it. He couldn't at the end of the day, but just the capacity for you to grant him that wish, and I'm sure that just made all the difference, just in his own mind, that you were able to let him do that. I think that autonomy we all want our whole life, right? If we can if we can have
respect.
that. Yeah, absolutely. When you talk about sustainable caregiving, for those maybe unfamiliar with that, how do you define that, and why is it so essential? How does it differ from maybe those more conventional approaches? I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, when I think of sustainable caregiving, I think of, caring for ourselves while we care for our family member for as long as we need to. And, that's sort of the challenge, is we don't know how long it will be. And so if we think it's just going to be a short amount of time, it's a sprint, then we're going to give up everything to care. And that's not something that's sustainable. Dad's mom lived to be 104. I thought he was on that trajectory. He passed at 99, and it was unexpected, believe it or not, at 99. So when I realized that this could go on for many, many, many years, that's when I realized it wasn't sustainable, and I had to take care of my own well-being. I couldn't just keep giving up everything that I did that helped me feel whole, and made me happy. So it's balance. It's just about balance and figuring out how to do both. And it is possible. That doesn't mean that it won't be hard. It doesn't mean we won't still have the frustration and some anger, but we're going to survive it. And we aren't going to come out on the other end and be in a worse place physically, mentally, emotionally. We can be strong.
We can. And for you personally, was there like a moment when you realized, okay, I have to set boundaries, I have to this mindfulness. How did these realizations just really shift your approach with that?
The big shift happened when I again realized I was trying to deconstruct the pain. I was trying to look into how can I feel better? How can I make this a sustainable experience? And I read an article, and Ryan Holiday was quoted, and he talked about Amr Fati and love your fate. This goes back to Stoic philosophy, which doesn't mean you just, handle everything. It means you manage it, so that your well-being is still considered. And when I read it, love your fate, I thought, how could I ever love this fate? And I had such a visceral negative reaction to that I knew there was something there. If I could do that, then I'd have something. This would be it. This has to be the answer, even though I can't even imagine. So I delved into that. That led me to some of these strategies. And when I recognized boundaries weren't on my radar. I mean, I had set them at work. It was easy at work. Personal life didn't really have a great need to do that. So this wasn't something I was familiar with or comfortable with. But as I started to learn about boundaries, I saw that's exactly what's happening here. So I can give you 3 quick examples. One, the limits around how much help is too much help. How much can I do? Dad was very happy to let me help a lot. He didn't want anyone else to come in and help. Well, that wasn't sustainable. And his resistance, I saw him turn into a different person. It was just kind of frightening. But I realized that I had to do this for me and have the conversation with him that, yes, you don't need help. I understand that, but I need help. I need help helping you. It was still not easy, but we got there. We got to the point where he was looking forward to folks coming in and helping. He asked when they'd be coming next. I never thought we'd get to that point, but we did. So that was recognizing my limit there. Another limit was around how much I worried. So I can think of even toward the end when I recognized he had interstitial lung disease. He was very concerned about it. He was now using oxygen. And every conversation we had was around that. And he'd forget why he had it, what the progression was. And it was causing me so much anxiety to have to talk about it in every conversation. And I couldn't help him. So at that point, he was in hospice only because I brought them in because of the pandemic. I didn't think anything was imminent. I just wanted support. And I called the social worker and we came up with a plan. And part of that plan was having somebody come in who could talk to him about his concerns, and then me deflecting and changing the conversation. And I knew putting a boundary around my worry. So, and then the third real quick example of boundaries is we had a neighbor helping pre-pandemic. Her help became overbearing. It was too much help. I mean, she was wonderful. Oh my gosh, it was coming from a place of love, but it became so much that it was interfering with my life, and I had to set boundaries around that. And having a conversation with someone who's helping you with something so intimate and personal and loving, and asking them to stop helping so much, it's really hard. And learning to set the consequences. And that it was a certainly learning curve, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you spoke to that because we always think of it, or I think have heard situations about needing the help or needing to ask for the help. But to define that when we've almost got too many, people stepping in, when it just makes it more stressful. And that's a reality. It absolutely is. So being able to identify that. Yeah. How did she take that? Did it go okay?
So the first conversation went great, and I prepared and I had my notes, and we sat down and it went fantastic. I couldn't believe how easy it was. For 2 days.
Yeah.
And then, part of it was she was bringing food that we didn't eat and Dad didn't want. She was coming every day. She was actually coming twice a day. And we were paying her. It was a program set up, which was fantastic. We were able to pay. And I let her know, we still want to continue to pay you the same amount. We just need less attention.
Yeah.
And Dad was really feeling like it was just too much. So this was a team decision.
Yeah.
And no, it wasn't coming in, which I'd asked her to do. So no, 2 days later, back to normal. And I had to have a little more serious conversation and share the consequences, which is recommended when we share our boundaries, sharing consequences is really important.
Yeah.
And so I think then she did, and we were able to preserve the relationship. I can
Mhm.
tell you that if it had gone on and I had not had these conversations with her, it would
Mhm.
have reached a point where I wouldn't have handled it as well. And we
Yeah.
probably wouldn't be able to maintain the relationship.
Yeah. And that's a great point to bring up is like, how do we clearly communicate our boundaries? Are there strategies that you've learned that have made it successful for you?
Yes, I learned a couple of things. One is that we need to understand our intention so that we
Mhm.
are able to clearly communicate what we need. And what we need is key. We can share exactly, this is something we need, and we don't have to share why. And we can use as few words as possible
Mhm.
because our need is, it's a fact. And then we can share the consequence, and it really needs to be a fairly simple conversation. And I think the hardest part about all of this is if our boundaries then are crossed, we may need to go back and reinforce. We might have to have another conversation, but we also have to understand this is our responsibility. This is not someone else's responsibility to not cross our boundaries.
Mhm.
And you might be dealing with someone who doesn't respect boundaries. They've not set boundaries. You can see they don't have boundaries in their life. Well, then they're going to continue to test. It's up to us to maintain those boundaries. And it's not easy. And but it's important.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, in addition to boundaries and mindfulness, we can't cover the whole book. People are going to need to read it. But what are a couple of your sustainable caregiving strategies that were just game changers for you?
Yeah, I will say the first two we've discussed them, but boundaries
Mhm.
and mindfulness were just quickly,
Yeah.
meditating is one way to achieve mindfulness and cultivate awareness. But it can also be so painful when we're caregiving because we're trying to calm and quiet the fears and the thoughts and the worries, and it can
Mhm.
feel like we're failing. But I can say that if meditating is something you want to try, this is the time to try it and stay with it, even if it feels like it's not working, because that awareness you cultivate can help with those reactions, with
Mhm.
those constant worries that are swirling. And it wasn't until, and I decided I was going to stay with it, even how it was painful, it was torture. But I stayed with it. And I remember the moment that dad said something. We had such a loving relationship, but boy, the triggers. He said
Mhm.
something that I would normally have reacted to immediately, and I didn't. And I stopped and I paused and I thought about it. I thought, well, that's interesting. So I let
Mhm.
curiosity lead me forward instead of
Mm.
this reaction that might have been anger or
Yeah.
fear. And that's the importance of mindfulness. That's where that came in. That was a game changer as
Mhm.
well. And then with mindfulness came compassion. When we get burned out, we don't realize it until we're often well down that path. And I realized I had no compassion for dad, for just strangers, for myself. And
Mhm.
reconnecting with that compassion was possible because of mindfulness. And compassion is one of the strategies. We don't think of compassion as a strategy, but
Mhm.
being able to cultivate that and bring that back into our experience, that was also a game changer. And yeah, I know we can't talk about all of them. We've talked about we've talked about several though without even naming them. So
Right.
the acceptance is when winning
Mhm.
is losing. That's sort of
Mhm.
accepting outcomes,
Mhm.
and kind of shifting our expectations a bit, and that
Yeah.
makes a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I could keep going on about the strategies. The other one that comes to mind is transforming obstacles. So we
Oh,
can talk about that when
so
we're ready.
good. Yes, I want you to just go through them. And I love the concept of winning was losing. So I
Mhm.
absolutely want you to share more about that and an example of how you've had to see that play out in your own experience. I think it does shift how we think about those situations, right? And
Mhm.
gives us permission to have that acceptance.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll share when it was time for him to stop driving. He refused. So he had had the stroke. His eyesight was really the only thing that was a long lasting effect. And it got to the point he would have to have it checked every year. There were doctors he went to several eye doctors. They would sign off that he was fine to drive. At this point, he definitely wasn't.
Mhm.
And that was clear. And I partnered with a tech at one of the offices, and she reinforced that this needed to stop. And so now his eyesight's, he's no longer at the legal limit to drive. And we get him an ID. His birthday's coming up. But he doesn't accept that. And he still wants to drive. And he's hidden keys all over the house. We kept the car because the caregivers we were using had to use his vehicle. That was the rule. And he would tell me he wouldn't drive, and he still would. Now, this was a battle. This was a real conflict. This was probably one of the most relationship damaging conflicts we had. And he was adamant. And so my husband and I would maybe go away. Part of our self-care was paddling. So in the morning, come back, and I'd know that he'd been in the car. So he had found another key. This went on and on. Until finally I had to put a club on the car. Now, this was months of battles. And I did see it as, I have to win this. And he, and I would never be able to control his thoughts. He definitely saw it as he was losing or he was winning. And this was, his dignity, his independence. And so for me to understand what was really happening in this dynamic was for me to have empathy for what he was going through. For me, and something that I wish I had done, and I did it, but it was a little bit late, when I talk about planning, is coming up with all of the alternative transportation resources out there and helping him get used to those and use them. But, approaching that with a lot more empathy and understanding. And instead of having, and I did the right thing by having this tech help, but I also could have had someone come in to talk with him and help him through this, because we're developing at all stages of our life, in all decades of our life. We're developing. This is a developmental challenge. We're asking someone who's been independent for 90 years, well, 80, maybe 80, 70 of those 90 years, to not, just rely on other people to get around. So it's all about, I think, having empathy, figuring out a strategy that's going to help everyone win, because that's what it's all about.
It is. So at the end of the day, was he accepting? Did it become this natural transition of him using other means of getting around? I know so many families have to face that.
He did. So this, the funny thing is, I put the club on there, gave the key to the caregivers, but he still tried to drive it with the club on. So this is where he was. But he did use, we called it DART, and demand something response transportation system. He would call and schedule his he was still going to the fitness center. He'd run errands, and then he would have a list ready when one of the caregivers came and they could go. So he finally accepted it. It was not a smooth transition, but I think, again, I think he was probably one of the most challenging cases we can see in terms of our care recipient, and we got through it. Good. And maintain the relationship. That was a tough one, though.
Good. I'm so happy to hear that. And the other strategy that I know you wanted to share with us was the transforming obstacles. What does that mean?
So we talk about when winning is losing. Well, this is sort of like when losing is winning. So in caregiving, there are so many obstacles. The systems present obstacles. Our family and friends can present obstacles. Our care recipient can feel like an obstacle. And what I learned was being able to transform those obstacles, which is basically reframing. It changed the experience entirely. The biggest one, I'll have to say, is just being a caregiver. When I realized that I needed to love my fate and couldn't imagine getting there, but then did. That to me was an obstacle. It was an obstacle because, the being a caregiver, because of the future I had imagined, because of the resistance. Dad was putting up so much resistance to help. I'm trying to help him. He's resisting that. What, how did I get here? And turning all of that around and accepting and embracing the caregiving role, that was overcoming an obstacle. It was reframing, and it changed the entire experience. And that's when these other strategies started to work. You can imagine, and I'll just give you an example of how the strategies work together and then how overcoming the obstacle can help us. I would run. So exercise was a big one of my go-tos just to feel better. But early on, when I was burned out, all running did was give me an opportunity to ruminate over all the challenges. I would go back and forth between the conflicts dad and I was having, and I'd come back more frustrated than when I left. So that run was not helpful. When I started to cultivate mindfulness, my runs were more peaceful. I could walk and not think about the challenges and the struggles, and actually solutions would come. So, it's just that's how the strategies work together. You really, each one works with several of the others, and then they build a strong foundation for you. So as I started to embrace the caregiver role and decided I have to see the good in this, the strategy started working. And then I started to see, well, there's a lot to be grateful for and thankful for. And gratitude, that's something I could not get close to. I did not feel gratitude. A gratitude journal did not work for me until I was able to overcome that obstacle of seeing the caregiving experience as such a negative and saw it as a positive. And I started to find gratitude in the caregiving experience itself. And obstacles can be, you think about any obstacles. I'm going to give another real quick example. The VA was wonderful. They helped us a lot, but it's an obstacle-rich environment people there are in tears. The tissue box is right there because there's so many challenges. The people are amazing. The system is challenging. And I also was one of those people in tears and didn't want dad to see how upset I was because something wasn't working out. And I found people within the system who are amazing. They helped us for the rest of our time, using the VA. And that's transforming an obstacle into a gift. Those folks were the gift. And then I could share that information with other people as well. Yeah. So it's a constant reframing of our challenges. Yeah.
A daily practice. It really is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The example of how they all fit together is such a beautiful way of describing how one mode of self-care for us might be the running. But if we're ruminating and feeling so anxious while we're doing that, it's going to take away from what we need to help our well-being. You mentioned how caregivers often neglect their well-being to care for others. And we hear that term self-care, but we don't always really know, okay, what does that mean for me? Why is it so crucial? And what would you offer like a new caregiver when they're thinking about what they should start to implement?
Yeah, it is. We do hear a lot about self-care, and it's funny because before caregiving, we might not even consider self-care, or if we do, we might think of a day at the spa. But when we start caring for a family member, it's so natural. They've got so many needs, and so natural to give up what we're doing to help them out because we can, and it feels good, and we don't necessarily see how it's damaging our well-being until it's too late. And so with caregivers, I think just the most important thing is to realize what gives you life, what helps you feel whole, and stay connected to those things. And it's about reimagining self-care. It's about, I didn't think of running as self-care, but it absolutely was self-care. Just spending time out in nature is self-care. Yeah. So, just getting in touch with those passions, what helps you feel whole, and then figuring out how to possibly, put them into 5, 10, 15-minute blocks of time, because sometimes that's all you have. So if some reading is something you love, that can be, if yoga, you can't go to an hour yoga class, but maybe you can do 5 or 10 minutes of poses every day. So you stay connected with that, which is so important. Music. And again, we don't think of these things as self-care, but they're vital. And I want to talk about even with a hospitalization, for example. So let's say your family member's in the hospital. I remember the first time dad was in the hospital, and I'm not recommending this. This was a bad plan. I was there 12 plus hours a day, before the sun came up till after the sun went down, gave up everything. Well, then he goes into rehab and I'm doing the same thing. And then he comes home. Well, I'm completely wrecked. Completely wrecked. So now the real work starts, and I'm in no condition to deal and manage that. So as I learned with the strategies, it is possible to continue self-care. It just looks different. It's about
Yeah,
modifying
right.
routines. And so I had strategies to make sure I ate healthy, and I had high
Mhm.
protein snacks constantly available. So I wasn't running through the drive-through, for every meal. And
Mhm.
I had a journal with me. So I was journaling in the hospital room. I did laps around the hospital. I still got some walks in. I woke up in the morning and
Mhm.
might have done my, meditation. Woke up earlier. So it's an hour in the car in the parking lot
Mhm.
at the hospital.
Yeah.
But I kept these things in play, and they didn't look the same.
Mhm.
But when he came home, I was strong and I was able to manage
Mm.
all of that. And I also did planning while I was in there. So I knew that, things were going to happen. Let's get those lined up.
Mhm.
That wasn't the case during the first hospitalization.
Yeah, yeah, and it's implementing some of those like practical things that we need to think through. And we, you shared so beautifully about the emotional side. There is a whole practical side. What are some of those considerations that we need to be encouraged about as we're trying to figure out how we do this and just the practical things we have to think about?
Yeah. The 12th strategy is planning. And so that's really useful on the practical side.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And I can use medication management as an example.
mm-hmm.
You wouldn't think okay, maybe you would, but I didn't realize how emotional, I guess I can see it now. I wouldn't want someone handing me my pills right now. And
Mhm.
dad refused. He just did not, he wanted to sort his own and he wanted to take his own. So every single step we had to think through carefully when he was no longer able to sort his medications. How do we do that so that he can maintain his dignity and doesn't feel like, somebody's handing them to him? So we went through several stages, but each time I thought it through, talked with dad, partnered with him. I love the term care
Mhm.
partner. It's so much about
Mhm.
partnering. So what do you think would work well, dad? Because this isn't working right now. And so we went through several iterations till the last one was where we were putting his pills in a medicine cup and setting it there in front of him. And we wouldn't stand there. We'd go stand around the corner and watch that he took them because he wouldn't accept that we would stand there and watch. So
Yeah.
I think with the practical, in every case, look ahead at what you expect to happen, and then look at what the options and resources are out there and who
Mhm.
you can talk to, who's been through it, what ideas have
Mhm.
worked. And Nicole, we talked about trial and error, and we haven't said it, but we've talked about it a lot.
Yeah.
Everything's trial and error.
Mhm.
Failure is just a data point, and by failure I
Yeah.
mean a solution that's not accepted,
Mhm.
something that doesn't work for you from as a self-care strategy. A strategy may not
Mhm.
work now, it may work later. So with the practical side, it's constantly about trying new things and learning about new things and
Mhm.
being open to it not working because you've learned something, so it's
Right.
okay.
Right. Yes. Yes. And for the caregiver, the new caregiver, feeling unprepared when we first start, we're just like, oh my gosh, where do I even begin? On the practical side, what advice would you give them?
So mistakes are going to happen.
Mhm.
It's okay. You think about, you're trying to prepare and plan for everything, and you can't possibly. And
Mhm.
you can have, and I recommend this, have an OT come in, an occupational therapist come into the home and get all the bars in place and get the lighting adjusted and get everything in place before hospitalization, because after the fall we have someone come in. Let's do it beforehand. But let me just say this, you can have all that in place, you can have done all the right things, you can
Mhm.
be standing right there with your family member, and they can still fall. It- Things happen, and so
Mhm.
we want to have compassion for ourselves and have compassion for those around us who are trying to help us, and understand that mistakes and misunderstandings and all of that are a part of the experience.
They are, oh my gosh, so much self-compassion and grace as
Grace,
we're
yes.
in it. You support caregivers and care partners so beautifully in the different things that you do. One of them is you also have a podcast. I would love for you to share what inspired you to start it, what can listeners learn from you, and then we'll talk about all the other ways you empower care partners.
Yeah, the podcast came about. I wanted caregivers, understanding that it's really hard to digest information, read a book. The podcast, it felt like a really great way for caregivers to be able to listen, maybe when they are running or walking or driving. And Allison Van Shee had the Island Treasures podcast, and I was on an episode with her, and then I was a guest again. And during that, she said something about self-caregiving strategies, is what the sustainable caregiving strategies were. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And we decided that we wanted to do something with that. And so we created this limited series podcast. So there are, I think, 13 or 14 episodes that cover the 12 sustainable caregiving strategies. We intended to keep them to 20 minutes, so that's much more manageable, but they're all about 45. And I apologize for that, but
Yeah.
still can be listened to, in 10 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
And I really hope that caregivers get from that, again, that they can be okay. And that each strategy, maybe everyone is not for them, but with a combination of a few of them, they can start to feel better.
Yes. And we pull out, I always say, when we hear the story and when we hear different things, we just pull out what we identify with, right? And what is going to be helpful to us in that moment. And one thing could help us now, and then maybe 3 months from now, we like, oh my gosh, I'm going to pull that out. I'm going to learn
Exactly.
from that. Yes. And caregiving changes us, as you've said. How has your life and perspective really shifted since your father's passing? And I know you talked about how you still use those strategies even now, even today.
Yeah, definitely. And I think of dad every day, and I think of my mom every day. I think his passing definitely brought up her passing from many, many years
Mm,
before.
hmm.
And I think about them, and I am grateful for what I have learned through
Hmm.
that experience. And I do put those strategies to use every day. And I know definitely within the last year, the gratitude piece that I struggled with so much in the beginning of
Hmm.
caregiving. I am definitely full of that every day. And I miss dad tremendously, but I'm so grateful for what I learned. And I say he was still teaching me lessons through that
Hmm.
entire experience. I was learning from him, and still do, as I reflect on things. So I think that's what's changed me. I'm much more connected with gratitude.
Yeah, yeah. And that is one thing I think I always come back to because it's so hard when you're in the moment. I struggle with that too. It's like, how can I see the good in something that feels so hard?
Yes.
But the practice of that, then you start to find the good, you know?
Mhm.
Our
Yeah.
mind goes to that. As you continue to grow the sustainable caregiving movement, how are you working with caregivers and care partners to empower them? And what is next for you? How can we connect with you?
Yeah. So I'm coaching caregivers. I have a package where we actually explore the strategies, looking at the specific experiences that are happening in a caregiver's life. So I feel like it's powerful. Now, if we spend the entire hour not talking about a strategy, that's fine too, but we do have these strategies to talk through, as caregivers are facing the challenges. So
Mhm.
coaching is one. And I am speaking and doing workshops. So that's an opportunity if, someone wants to have a workshop at their place of work, maybe, or, in their community. I love to do that. And I actually have one workshop and presentation that I'm doing that really combines all the strategies. It's creating an empowered caregiver support system.
Mm.
And then I do have another book I haven't really shared that
Ah.
I'm working on. And as you said, this book combined the practical and the emotions, the support for the emotions. This one's just going to be 12 sustainable caregiving strategies because I've continued to research them. So even after dad's passing and I'm no longer directly caregiving, I have researched them and found so much more that I want to
Mhm.
share. And so this book will be that. And folks can just go to sustainablecaregiving.com, read the blog post, because I am sharing it all there right now
Oh,
as
good.
I delve into those strategies. So
Oh,
that's a good way to connect as well as
it,
social media.
yes, yes. I can't wait for that to come out. And thank you for the work that you do and how you encourage and give wisdom to all of us. So I'm so appreciative of you and your voice in this space. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. Thank you too for all the work you do.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.